This is the Merschman Seeds Ag Weather Outlook, March 17th, 2018, St. Patrick's Day. I see both Merschman and NCGA have a lot of green in their logos there, so I guess there's a little bit of Irish in our briefing today. Well, let's take a look at past precipitation over the last week. And what we had was the center of action was really over the southeast U.S., but over the middle part of the Corn Belt, there was some precipitation. Some of that was in the form of snow, if not most of it. So winter still feels like it's around in many spots, but overall was a fairly quiet week with the exception of that area of snow. Now, I'm going to be talking a bit about, I keep on sort of thinking spring here, but look at this. If you're up in the northern Corn Belt, the northern plains, the upper Midwest, it's been a pretty harsh winter and it doesn't really show any sign of relenting soon. Take a look at the coverage of snow. Now, I wouldn't say this is all that extensive for this time of year. Probably fairly close to normal, but there is still a pretty high water equivalent in those areas in purple, over 2 inches, in some cases even over 4 inches in those areas. And like I said, we added some more snow. This was last week, not really in the Corn Belt, but in parts of South Dakota, western South Dakota, western Nebraska. This is the nor'easter that we had last week. Lots of snow in the northeast U.S., so still signs of snow, just not only in the Midwest, but across the nation. Signs of winter remain. Now, over the last week, when we look at departure from normal, most of the region was a bit below normal, not excessively so, with the exception of the eastern Corn Belt. Look at Ohio there, 6 to 9 degrees below normal last week. Parts of western Iowa into Nebraska, we warmed up a little bit above normal in those areas. Not a lot, but just a little bit. So one of the things I really look at closely here is, at this time of year, soil moisture. I know you do too. If there's too much, we risk soggy fields. We had a bit of that, quite a bit of it actually last spring over the eastern Corn Belt. If we don't have enough, I'm really worried about that, because if we don't have enough, the problem then becomes, as we get into the summer months, especially with this long-term trend of warmer temperatures, summer temperatures, that can pose a problem. So right now, I would prefer a light green, which is saying a little bit above normal over most areas. But overall, we're in fairly decent shape. You might remember a couple weeks to a month ago, the eastern Corn Belt was really soggy, and we've had sort of a downtick in precipitation recently, so it's not so bad there anymore. It's in pretty good shape. I'm sure there's some exceptions out there. Upper Midwest, when that snow melts, look at that, when that snow melts over this area, that's going to be a beneficial snow melt. A bit of a problem here where it's wet, but overall pretty good, with the exception of, and this is the U.S. Drought Monitor, parts of southeast Iowa and northern Missouri and Kansas. Those are the areas where we really do need additional precipitation. But if you look elsewhere, there's no drought over the majority of the Corn Belt at the current time. So again, where we need that additional precipitation, generally speaking, parts of eastern North Dakota, but that's going to be a little bit better once that snow melts, but mainly southeast Iowa and northern Missouri and Kansas and a very small part of Nebraska. So this week we're going to have sort of a west to east flow. We're going to have a front moving along that flow. When we see that, we would expect systems to move from west to east. Temperatures, though, look at this. I don't know. I'm frustrated about spring. Really itching to get out there and start planting a few things. But temperature here, averaging below normal. A front will be passing early this week. And it does look like the core will be right along, core of rain will be right along here. So some of this will be beneficial. It would be better if it was further north, but then going across Kentucky, which has been wet. So here's your storm track right here. There's your system, area of low pressure over this weekend and then into early in this week, and the possibility of a couple inches of rain along those areas in purple. Now, further up to the north, where the air is colder, there's also some more snow possible in the Dakotas, even a little bit of snow in Iowa and a little bit in the eastern Corn Belt. I don't think that'll amount to a whole lot. So winter still has its grasp on the upper Midwest and the upper plains. Now we get into the 6 to 10 day range, and what do we see? Well, I think the biggest change is that the jet stream pushes up to the north, bulges to the north. Areas in brown, shades of brown, mean that the jet stream's a little bit further north than normal. It probably means that cold air will retreat a bit. Now, if you're a grower in North or South Dakota, parts of Minnesota, you might not see that ridge of high pressure pushing into your area, but it's going to bring temperatures back to normal for the most part, with some exceptions. Looks like the eastern Corn Belt, though, far eastern Ohio will also be below normal. Now, as we get into the period at the end of March into early April, we get a little bit more of an amplified flow. And what I mean by that is a digging trough in this area, sort of pushing up to the north in this area. And this is the 11 to 14 day range. We get this boundary here. Remember, I talked about this earlier this year, this boundary with this amplified flow. It sets up a boundary, and that was actually the stage that set it up for the flooding over the Ohio and the Mississippi, lower Mississippi. And I tell you, if you look at that upper Midwest again, Dakotas, Minnesota, Nebraska, Northwest Iowa, boy, I tell you, we're getting in towards the 1st of April, and we're still looking at temperature departures 10 degrees below normal in some of those areas. So week 1, I think I talked about that system moving through, and here's week 2. Week 2 could be sort of busy here. Right now, it's way out there. I wouldn't put a whole lot of confidence, but it looks to me like along the Ohio River, maybe Kentucky. So Kentucky's starting to get pretty wet now with the system this week and maybe a system next week. Pretty quiet over the upper Midwest in week 2, and more modest precipitation over the eastern Corn Belt. So I wanted to sort of show you here, thinking ahead. I know everybody's sort of thinking a little bit further than my near-term briefing here. So this is for weeks 3 and 4. And on the left is temperature. And I think this pattern that we're in looks very, very persistent. So what does that mean? Well, that means North Dakota, South Dakota, Kansas, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan very well could, for the next 30 days, be averaging below normal temperatures. Then over the central and eastern Corn Belt, near normal. So I just don't see a prolonged push of warm air that's going to give us that jump start to the early part of the season at the time. Now over the eastern Corn Belt, this is precipitation, weeks 3 and 4. I think we need to watch out for some soggy conditions. We're not going to have those really, really warm, sustained temperatures. So, with normal temperatures or even a bit below normal, makes us a little bit more vulnerable to those wet soils. So, especially Tennessee and Kentucky, but also continued Ohio, Indiana, probably not so much Illinois, weeks 3 and 4. So, it doesn't look to me like I see a spring has sprung type prolonged pattern coming up this year. It very well could be a delayed start to spring, especially over the northern Corn Belt. That's this week's briefing. A lot to focus on as always. Hope you have a great week. Take care.